One of the issues I run into is describing what kind of martial art I actually teach. I don't like calling it self-defense because that's repetitive for one, and inaccurate for two. And I don't like calling it street MMA because I'm not a douchebag. But then, I came across this term combatives. I had no idea what it meant, but I thought it sounded cool. So like a good millennial, I took to the YouTubes and the Googles and did some research. And what I found was this. Basically, it's a bunch of guys in cargo pants talking about the importance of situational awareness, sudden onset violence, and being able to do whatever it takes to win the fight. Which are all important, sure, but if I'm being honest, this actually looks a lot more like guys LARPing in army fatigues than it does real fighting. But are they? In this video, I'm going to go over my thoughts on combatives and how this may or may not be the best practice for personal protection. So, make sure you're subscribed and you have notifications turned on, and let's get started. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to define combatives as training to use martial arts in spontaneous or non-consensual violence. Certain reality-based self-defense guys will tell you that by definition, this has to look different than combat sports training, because combat sports are practiced for recreation, or, surprise, surprise, to win a combat sport. Whereas what we're doing is real. This is about survival. This is about going home. So, because we're not playing by any rules, the rules of engagement have to look different. But here's the thing. They don't change, really. If you can knock someone out in the ring, you can do it on the streets. If you can choke someone unconscious on the mats, you can do it in the club. The actual physical skills you need remain pretty consistent from combat sports to combatives, because it turns out martial arts aren't that different no matter what you're using them for. In fact, it only behooves you to be good at these things because you never know if the guy assaulting you is also trained in martial arts. And no, don't come at me with that idea that a real martial artist would never pick a fight, because you and I both know that's a lie. I know that's a lie because you're probably the same person picking a fight with me down in the comment section, and thank you for the engagement. But there is a gap between combat sports and combatives training, and that gap is martial arts. Now, that might sound confusing since I just said that martial arts is the common link between the two, but hear me out. In a combat sport, your success is going to be mostly dependent on your martial arts fighting ability. Yes, there's strength and conditioning, and a solid game plan, and good coaching, and of course, there's always luck. But for the most part, you're going to find success because you're better at fighting than your opponent. In combatives training, that isn't the case, because like I said earlier, you don't always get to know when you're going to have to fight. Or at least, that's what the tactical bros want you to think. Now this is a side tangent and something I go into more detail on in this video right here. But for the most part, and usually, there isn't actually some ruffian hiding in the shadows waiting to jump out at you at a moment's notice. The most likely form of violence you're going to run into is going to be an argument that escalates into a full-on shouting match that escalates into a full-on fight. Meaning, yes, you're not going to have a full 8-week fight camp to prepare for that fight, but there will be plenty of cues beforehand to help you get ready to know, hey, this might turn into a fight. So what the tactical crowd is saying when they're saying they're training for the fight that you can't prepare for, they mean you don't have as long to prepare for it. But if you're being responsible about your combatives training, you should be able to recognize that a situation is getting out of hand and hopefully de-escalate before it gets there, or when it does get there, be ready to have that fight. And by the way, I'm not ignoring the fact that sudden onset violence can happen because it very obviously does, but I am saying that in those situations, your attacker is relying on the element of surprise. And when someone has a drop on you like that, that's a huge advantage and there's not much you can do about it. There's not nothing you can do about it, but the situation is so unlikely for one, and so tipped against you for two, that there's not really enough to warrant actually worrying about it that much. But I digress, because the main point still stands. Combatives, or what could be called self-defense style training, relies a lot more on you being able to read the cues, or pre-fight indicators, when a situation might lead to a fight. Whereas a combat sport is, of course, naturally concerned with how that fight is actually going to go. So where a combat sport is, let's say, 80 to 90% about your martial arts ability, combative training is more in the 50 to 60% range. In fact, I might even say it's in the 40% range. More important, I would say, are the soft skills elements of combatives. Being able to interpret those pre-fight indicators and de-escalate if you can, but elevate if you have to. This is the major gap between combatives training and combat sports. If you can avoid the fight, you should avoid the fight. Whereas obviously if you're being paid to fight, you need to hurry up and get in there. But there is one more soft skill that is equally as important, if not more important, in combatives, and that's the weaponization of aggressiveness and commitment. Yes, it's important in a combat sport to be able to turn on your aggression and march forward towards your fight, but it's even more valuable in combatives, where most of the time you're not going to get into a fight with another trained martial artist, just someone who wants to get in your face and make you back down. As Tony Blauer says, there are more people in the world successfully defending themselves than there are black belts, meaning it's more important that you know how to turn on your aggression and not cower away from a potential threat, because most of the time, people only pick on weak targets. And this is where combative martial arts like Krav Maga and MCMAP really excel. Because the truth is, their martial arts, their actual physical fighting skills, kind of suck. They usually range from really bad to they're alright. But where they really excel is taking a normal person with no prior training and turning them into an aggressive, shouting little hyena in as little as 6 weeks. And no, this isn't a pitch for your local Krav Maga program. I'm just saying this is what I see these programs really excelling at. The bad Krav Maga programs will make this the only requirement for their training. They will forgive horrible or dysfunctional techniques because they can do them aggressively and count on that to carry them through to victory. Which is why the good combatives training programs look a lot less like rake the eyes, stomp the groin, and kick the sacrum, and a lot more like a mix of boxing, judo, and jiu-jitsu. That's not to say that there's anything wrong or bad about trying to rake the eyes, but if you rely on that to be the only thing that'll carry you in a fight, but since I brought it up, you don't need to become a judo black belt or a golden gloves boxer to be able to successfully defend yourself. A good understanding of some straight punches, a couple mount escapes, maybe some takedown defense, that'll take you most of the way in terms of personal protection. Those aren't the only things you have to practice, but if you practice those things, you're probably good. Also, depending on who you ask, that's all you need to become UFC champ these days, but that's a different video. So what does that leave us with? A martial arts program that isn't super concerned with martial arts, but has to be able to channel and utilize your aggression, and at the same time, teach you a whole bunch of soft skills so you don't have to use that aggression. All right, that sounds doable and kind of interesting, right? Don't lie to me. The fact of the matter is, there's plenty of people in my town alone who are excellent self-defense instructors but have nobody in their class. If I told you most of the training is going to be about reading body language, understanding how to talk to people, and every once in a while you're going to throw a few punches, is that really something you want to spend your time doing? Be honest. But I can hear you already. You're saying you're different. You're saying you are really focused on self-defense and personal protection. Okay, great. Let me ask you this. How many times a week are you willing to go practice that personal protection, and how much are you willing to pay for it? But don't despair, my tactic comrade, because you don't have to throw away all those years you spent learning self-defense training just to make sure you have people to, actually train. You have two options that are guaranteed to get people in the room and make sure you're still teaching what you want to teach. Both are viable, but I think one is slightly more honest. Option one, you run basically a straightforward boxing / kickboxing / wrestling / grappling / whatever martial arts program. And every once in a while, you'll sprinkle in topics of self-defense. You'll talk about stuff like weapons, you'll do some of those cool realistic training drills, and sometimes you'll sit people down and talk about reading those pre-fight indicators. 90% of the program is going to look like regular martial arts training, 5% is going to be those super cool drills that everyone wants to do, and the remaining 5% will be about the actual things people need for personal protection. You'll keep people interested in the training, excited to come back, and be honest about the goal in your program. Or you can go in the other direction, where you have your guys train in full-on tactical gear and talk about the boogeyman waiting in the shadows, and practicing techniques that, while cool, might not be the most effective or the most useful in a real fight. You'll still have a room full of people, because there's never a shortage of guys willing to strap 6 knives to their body and shove a handgun at their butt. But I don't think it'll be as honest of a training as the other option. Instead of LARPing in a gi, they'll just be doing it in tactical gear. But either way, you'll have a room full of people. Anyway, that's my opinion on combatives. And while it might sound like I'm mostly negative about it, I actually think it's a much better and more descriptive term for non-combat sports martial arts. As I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of the term self-defense based martial arts, because self-defense is really more of a mindset and also a legal term. Whereas I think combatives can encompass not only the philosophies of self-defense, but also the physical training of martial arts. So when it comes to describing non-competitive martial arts, I think combative is a much better term. And while you might think I have a negative opinion of Krav Maga and other tactical systems, I actually noticed kind of a shift on the macro level to the culture of those systems. Yeah, back in the day, it was definitely guys training in BDUs, pretending like they were out on the battlefield while they were in the strip mall center of a 7-Eleven. Nowadays, it looks a lot more like what you would consider MMA, but sometimes there's a knife. And honestly, that sounds pretty cool. All that being said, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you learned something. If you wouldn't mind, please be sure to subscribe, tap the notification bell, like, share, and leave a comment. And if you want to support the channel, please head on over to the description box down at the bottom. There's a whole bunch of codes and links down there to help buy not only combat self-defense gear, but some of the best training gear on the planet. All that being said, this has been Rob from Combat Self-Defense. I want to thank you guys for all the hard work. Thank you for the hard work yet to be done, and I'll see you next time. Yo, bomb!